Um, so one of the things that I mentioned sort of in the first question was that your outdoor 2023 season was, going back through the World Athletics website and looking at the times and the results. Um, I feel like 2022 to 2023 indoors were you made progress, but it was sort of like fairly comparable. And then the times that you were running 2022 indoors, you could see where these 2023 indoor times were coming. If you don't look at the indoor times at all and you look at just your 2022 outdoor season and then just your 2023 outdoor season, there's obviously like a big jump there. Um, you ran your windy 10-0 and all this kind of stuff. What were some of the changes or what are some of the factors that you think kind of led to this this sort of new improved outdoor Miles Lewis in 2023?
Yeah. So, like I said, my the past few years is experimentation. Um, so I have been experimenting with my sleeping patterns, my diet, like nutrition, weight, like anything that you can think of, even the company that I keep, as I had mentioned before, entertainment. Like if I'm willing to experiment with anything that is legal and healthy to see if or if not uh, there will be benefit to it. So in the 2022 season, coming out of indoors, I was what I felt on like a hot streak, for myself. I'm running low 6.6s. That was pretty surreal to me. Um, One of the things which I did was looked into where are the elite athletes who are not running consistently at A and B tier events. So, more like the bronze level or the C and D events where these guys are legitimate professionals, but not necessarily your Noah Lyles or your Trayvon Bromell.
Hmm. Hmm.
I began track through the IAAF. Where are they competing? When are they running their fastest? How many meets in a row can an athlete go before you start seeing like a drop in performances? And I was just looking for patterns. You obviously can't, like every athlete is different, so you can't make a set rule book for these things. But I wanted to experiment with what I had found and what I had come across. So the first thing that I did was I chose a location that was relatively affordable, relatively close in location to New York, and like relatively reasonable in regard to like the weather conditions, so that it wasn't like super or so far different from like a summer in New York that I would be like overwhelmed by either like the time change or the weather itself. So I chose Florida. I noticed that a lot of athletes will go down to like the Pure Athletics and the Star Athletics events,
Hmm. Hmm.
and often compete very fast down there. They also, depending upon which direction the wind is blowing, they will turn the event around. And not only is that in itself a benefit, but not having to think whether or not there might be a headwind in itself is also like a benefit in regard to focus.
Yeah, it's one less thing
And
to worry about.
yeah, so my focus is like it's something I take very seriously. When I am focused, when I know where I'm going, when I know what my goal is, I'd like to think most often I perform the way that I expect to perform based upon what my numbers say. When things get a little bit more out of control, I have to adjust and learn from those things. But last season, I went down to Florida, and on the day of the race, excuse me, uh, we were rained out. Like it was like sunny when we got there, and then it just wasn't. So I actually don't think it rained the entire event. They just kept, pushing it back how many ever minutes or hours you have to when there's a lightning strike. So there was a storm within, X amount of miles of the event, and it didn't start raining until they canceled the event. So obviously, I was very frustrated. I was pretty disappointed. I felt like I was ready to run fast. And when I went home, I started to experiment again. And a lot of my experimentation happens on race day, especially because of the way that I train and the way that I race, which is low volume. That's racing right now as well. But I didn't have the opportunity to test some of the things that I was looking forward to testing, which would have given me some information heading into the rest of the season. And one thing in particular that I was working with was like a mock keto diet. And this might sound crazy to anyone who knows what they're doing in the sprint world, but I I don't have the resources that your typical Nike or Adidas athlete has. I'm running in the grass 99% of the time. I don't have an indoor track to work with, so like I'm on the treadmill a lot. So what I feel I have to do to be on the same level or playing field as the other elite athletes is to like be willing to test myself for better or for worse. And that mock keto diet, I believe, had I been able to run at that meet in Florida, I probably would have ran relatively well, but not to what my numbers would have suggested during indoor training. And I would have been able to say, okay, this probably isn't going to work for me. But not having competed at that event, I stuck to that diet. And I think that I ran, and when I say slow, that's, relative. I don't at 10 anything is slow, but I think I ran as slow as 10:8 that season. I had no energy. I was really lean and really light, and I thought that that was what would work. But it was too far off in one direction. And actually how I had actually figured out a weight that I wanted to run at. And by no means am I promoting like extreme dieting or that. This is just what I did and what my experience is. And backtracking to my collegiate training and high school training, I realized that I was competing like on a relatively heavy frame in comparison to most elite sprinters. I remember going to the first round of the NCAA East preliminary meet and seeing some of the athletes down there, and I was like, they look different, but I don't know what it is. And years later, I realized is that like sprinters they're very lean. A lot of them we have big legs, and we're not all extremely lean. But what I ended up doing was, I have some quirky experiments that I'll run. But I took maybe like 15 or 20 elite 100-meter runners, and then I was aiming for like 200 and 400 runners, and that dreaded BMI chart. Everybody seems like, and I agree, for the standard way that someone would say to use that, like forget that. But what I did was I plugged these athletes' height and weight into that chart, and I tried to see if there was a pattern or an average number depending upon what the event was. And I found a pattern. So I calculated what my weight would have to be around to hit that average number. And then I had to figure out, well, how do I eat? What do I eat to get to that number? So like my natural frame is probably anywhere from like 165 to 170. And I felt I needed to try to cut down to maybe about 157. Okay. I was like the specific number. And I did that in as healthy a way as I could. And I compete at that weight now, and I wouldn't go under it. And if I go a little bit over it, that's okay too. I'm not saying you need to be like super precise with these things, but for me and because I don't have access to certain things, little things like that, they really matter to me. Like make sure you hit the weight that you want to fight at today. Where's your focus at today? I know what I'm eating when I train, so I know I've deviated just a little bit, but all of that goes back to say that the spring season last year was the experimentation was for worse, but I learned from it. And what I did was, because the season ended much earlier than I thought it would, I took the rest of the season to experiment. So I figured out that the keto diet wouldn't work for me. I had to try it. And I competed at two local events. These obviously were not like IAAF events, but I think I ran 10:36 at both of these events. And this is like out of season. I'm kind of just
Oh,
having fun.
okay.
So obviously nobody knows that really unless, they follow me on social media. Excuse me. But I realized then, okay, there's something to, what I am thinking is going on here. And I continued to train after that. And there were about three practices where my performances in practice suggested that I should be able to run a legal, like between 10:16 and 10:19.
Okay.
Add some wind to that. Why shouldn't I be able to go under 10:1? So when I opened up this season, wind dated 10:06, and then like a slightly wind dated 10:17. That was pretty much like right on the mark of what I knew I was capable of running. I just had to be patient from the last season through
Yeah.
indoor into outdoor. And then actually, again, I apologize for the mouthful here.
No, 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 no. It's great. It's really interesting.
Okay, thank you. During the indoor season, because of the like lack of resources, I train in Long Island, New York. So, once it starts getting dark early, once school starts, I don't have access to a track. Basically,
Hmm.
so I have to, like work my training around those things. So I'm very, very acceleration focused during all of the indoor training because that's pretty much all I can train unless I hit a treadmill for some type of like tempo running, or
Yeah.
I get a day. But after this indoor season, and what I do every season is I'll sit down, if I'm frustrated for any reason, or even if I'm not frustrated, but I'll finally be able to look over the tapes of like the events where I wasn't necessarily happy with the way I performed because,
Hmm.
the is gone from that. So I can just look at it like kind of like from a more scientific perspective.
Hmm.
And I realized that there were two things that I really wanted to try heading into this spring season. One of which involved like the intensity which I leave the block, and the other was the duration of my drive phase. I had what I felt was like a particularly long drive phase, but I realized that my torso was over like my center of mass while my shins were basically ready to run. So all I'm saying is that, I was leaning over for no reason at some point in my run. And I
Okay. So,
decided,
so sorry, just touch on that. So basically, your torso angle wasn't matching your shin angle. So if your shin angle's here, then your torso angle's more, uh,
right,
yeah, it's shallower to the ground. Yeah. Okay.
especially in the latter portion of the drive. So like
Right.
I was driving, like 35 meters. Like I look like this elite runner. And really I just had like my
You're bent at
chest
the
and my,
waist. Yeah.
yeah. And so I was like, well, I ran 660. My season best was 661, and then I think I hit 662 like literally every final this past indoor season. And I'm thinking like, okay, if I can run 662, 661 to 662, that lines up with 10:1, which is what my training told me I should be able to run. What if I change the drive mechanics? Like what could I hit?
Hmm.
And so I just went with it. And so my first outdoor race, I got to line up with Noah Lyles, which is like I enjoy that. Because I don't really have anything to lose at that point.
Yeah.
So he was actually raced him quite a few times during the indoor season, and usually about like 40 meters in, he would just like take off on me. And my first outdoor race, I actually have film of it, which is nice. So I can like go over that and like reflect and see what needs to be worked on or what can be worked on. But I think I took him out to about 70 meters this time. Yeah, I want to say about 70 meters, and so the intensity of the block and that mechanical change and the drive phase, which I had actually run by Coach Z of Athletics
Yeah.
Westchester. He was like, "Yeah, I think you should go for it." So I was like, "I think I'll go for it." So I wasn't like surprised that I ran those times. I understand it's like surprising to the rest of the world, but like I obviously am a part of all the little like intricate things that are going on
Yeah.
over here. My little crew, like I think ragtag crew, just trying to figure out like how can we make this guy faster. So it's like one team, but I'm just the guy who gets to go out and run, you know.
Yeah.
So that kind of explains a little bit more, hopefully, of your original question as to the difference between my 2022 outdoor season and then where I'm at right now.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess if I was to summarize it, it was sort of like lots of small methodical changes sort of like taken place during that period, and it was kind of it was the culmination of those changes. You know, each of them kind of contributed a little bit of that time improvement, and then we kind of saw the result come in, you know, like 12 months later or whatever.
Yeah.
Admittedly, I wasn't aware of the 10 threes that you spoke about late in 2022, which obviously would perhaps kind of given the, you know, like the average observer such as myself a little bit more, you know, a little bit more indication of what might be to come. You touched on this kind of like the limitations without an indoor training facility. Obviously, I've not lived in New York, but I've lived in Massachusetts, not too far away, and like the winters are pretty brutal, and it gets dark and stuff like that. So, and you've touched on, you know, you might be doing tempo runs on a treadmill, for example. But what are some of kind of the typical kind of modifications that you feel you've had to make in order to, you know, train within, I guess, within the constraints of your environment, if that makes sense?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, I wasn't even sure at first if I could do this, but fortunately, as I said before, I wasn't looking to be a professional athlete. I just wanted to see could I get faster. So there wasn't really much holding me back from that. Had I come into this with the thought I want to be a professional athlete, I probably would have quit by now. So with the winters in mind, I basically set up my training so that, sorry, I just want to backtrack actually. When I had first gotten into this, one of my good friends, Vincenzo Battaglia, he's a local coach out here. He's also a great sprinter. He had written himself a program during COVID when I was just like eating and drinking my life away. And I actually a hospital stay because I had like severe electrolyte imbalances. I just didn't really have any like.
Oh, I apologize. Sorry, I laughed there. Kind of, it's sort of like thinking you were sort of like just sort of, you know, living the high life, sort of not worrying too much about your macros or your alcohol intake. But okay, got sort of like to health issues, right? Carry on. Sorry.
Oh, please don't apologize. I kind of just like segued into a totally topic, it seems, but after I had got out the hospital, I realized I just didn't want to ever feel that way again. And I had mentioned that I had been burned before, and I had found out in between that time that I had been burned and then the electrolyte issues that I had arthritis in my knee, and I was just not in a great place, like mentally. I didn't have a lot of confidence. I was like a depressed person, and I realized I didn't want to feel that way anymore. So that's actually when I challenged myself to not feel that way. The worst that could happen is end up back there, not necessarily in a hospital bed, but feeling how I felt. And, you know, I've lived there. I can manage that. But I dared myself to try to be different. And one of the first things that I did was I reached out to my friend Vincenzo, and I asked him to share his program with me. It was 400-meter based. So I wasn't really able to stick to that, but it was something that was in front of me that gave me accountability to get up and train. And then it was also part of my like inspiration or like drive to craft or create something myself. So again, this just kind of comes back to like my community inspiring me to do things that I didn't know that I could do. So sorry, I got a little sidetracked there. If you can just rerun where we had left off, because I know there's a connector here somewhere.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, we're just sort of like talking about the constraints in terms of training in New York. It's cold in the winter, no indoor track access. kind of like how are you putting that together? Because I think I mentioned earlier on at some point, it's not a typical environment where you see a lot of 10 flat 6 100 meter sprinters coming from.
Right. So as I said, his program was 400 base. So I realized like pretty much within like a week of attempting to do something like that, that wasn't going to work for me. But I had begun to make serious changes, like the way that I slept, the way that I ate. I was also just obnoxiously positive with myself, like to a fault. And like it made it, I faked it until I made it, you know? And I began to put together a program by looking back, as I had said before, as to what worked and what didn't work, and then seeing, well, how can I make that work with a New York winter? Because that's obviously like a significant portion of training. A lot of professional athletes don't do the indoor season because they're using it to train through for spring. What I came up with basically is an acceleration based program that is like centered around rest for the indoor portion of my training. So my first year, really, with after the 661, I trained by myself just about 100% of the time. But I was really fortunate. One of my high school classmates, former classmate, and track and field teammate, we just connected and we just kept training together. So his name is Shervon Barthelme, and he actually works at a local like soccer facility.
Okay.
And what that has given the both of us now access to is about a 30-yard turf field.
Right.
If, you might have seen some of like my workout videos.
Mhm.
So we'll work in there. That has been a blessing. Like it's the small things that really make a difference, but being able to, especially when it's cold or snowing, to extend out what once was like pretty much like 95% of the time during the 2022 indoor season, if the weather was not like up to par for me to be able to train in it, I would be on the treadmill. And I
Yeah.
was able to take almost all of that treadmill work and bring it to the turf field this time. And the way that I trained on the treadmill was extremely high incline. I bought bands. I don't know if you're familiar with like the Vertimax.
Yeah.
So I knew I didn't have like, 10 grand to drop on a Vertimax, however much it is. I don't know. I didn't have that at the time. So I was like, well, what can I get to kind of mimic something like that to make up for the fact that I'm not able to run outside right now, and that also the treadmill has a very limited speed, I think of 12 miles per hour.
Right.
So I bought a bunch of different bands. And did a lot of resisted acceleration work, even in my tempo work at that time. And then fortunately getting together with Shervon, we've now been able to take a lot of that work and bring it to that 30 or so yard turf field. We have access to Prowler now, which is
Right.
that's a big part of my preseason training, and I'll even take that into mid-season training. And last year and this year as well. Obviously, we still need to sprint fast to be fast. So to work around that, and this is hopefully something that some young guy or girl or masters athlete as well may take that trains in like a cold weather state. I don't encourage high intensity sprints in cold weather. It's just you just want to do anything that you can to prevent injury, obviously. But
Yeah.
I'm fortunate in the sense that the complex that I live in, we have just a small community gym. I will warm up in there, like a high intensity warm up, so that my muscles are extremely like loose and prepared to sprint. And it could be 20 degrees. It could be an 18-degree day. If I have to sprint, like I'm going to find a way to make that happen in a reasonable way. And what I'll do is I'll just go out into the parking lot, and I will do fly work in the parking lot. And then between those sprints, I'm either right back into like a heated car, or I'll go back into the gym area, warm up again, take the needed rest, and then sprint again. So I'm only outside for like a handful of seconds.
Yeah. Okay. And for anybody listening that's not American, we're talking, when we say 18 degrees or 20 degrees, we're talking Fahrenheit. So, we're talking a good few degrees below freezing there.
Yeah. So, but honestly, I used to think that it was a disadvantage, but it has made me much more mentally capable of taking on pretty much like any challenge that comes my way through the seasons. And it definitely gets challenging, like on and off of the track. But the way that I treat myself and the variables that I have to deal with in just preparing to sprint, they make things easier in the long run. Would it be nice to have like a set track? Absolutely. We actually have a local indoor track at a community college, which I actually graduated from and coached there, but I'm not able, I don't have access to that track. Would be very nice, but like I can't put my focus on that. So yeah, would I like to have things a little bit easier? Of course. But is it like, is it possible to sprint at an elite level, not having access to certain things that you would think the average elite athlete has access to? It definitely is. And I think that most of us in the track and field community, outside of it as well, but this is a track and field podcast here. I think we are and are around athletes that are much faster than they realize. It's just, especially in the States, a lot of athletes, I think, are thrown into a program where, because we have so many athletes, one or two of them is going to thrive. And then the rest, you have that middle group, and then some kids are just like, what happened? If you find the correct way to train for yourself, and, I know it's not going to happen for everybody, but if you do find that, I think we are all much more capable than what we probably thought we were capable of. And that includes what people have thought we ourselves may be capable of as well. So.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think sort of like be willing to sort of, I guess, like think outside the box a little bit and sort of do your own research and sort of try things that, try things that make sense. Don't just try reckless things, but try things that make sense. But and one of the things that I wanted to say as well, with regards to you sort of like describing your situation and trying to frame it in a more positive way as well, like you were doing. I think that if you have access to everything all the time, then this it's not possible to do any type of training modality that you see on Instagram or wherever, to try and incorporate that into a program. It's just not possible. You can't do everything. And so sometimes, like, the limitations that you have in terms of training time or facilities or whatever, then they force you to forget about some of those things that you can't incorporate and focus on what you are able to do. And so with that, it becomes easier to sort of like create a more sort of like focused program, rather than thinking, oh, it might be nice to try this. You're less likely to consider that in terms of, well, I know that I can't do that, so let's not even give that any thought. Let's just focus on what I can do. And yeah, I mean, I think that, like, typically through most of the people that I've spoken to kind of on this podcast or elsewhere, like, I don't know that I've really encountered people that are having a lot of success without covering a lot of the basics, or covering the basics, should I say. So for example, you've spoken about like the cold weather, and you will find a way to go out there and sprint. And I don't think there's any, sprinting is a big part of any successful sprinters training program, right? That's going to be like, that's like the bread and butter. That's what's making them successful. So focusing on that and finding a way that you can get that done, I think that's got to be the first thing before kind of, and I'm now digressing a little bit, before kind of worrying about what I would maybe term some of the fluffier things that you can incorporate into training.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I've actually been a victim. I don't know if that's the way I really want to word it, but to my own
curiosity, probably.
Yeah, so like when the spring season has rolled around now, and obviously my spring season, I feel has ended prematurely, and that's okay. But you know, I can sprint now. There's tracks around, and I have time to do things. But sometimes I, take advantage of that to the point of just wearing myself down a little bit more than I would
Hmm.
have during the indoor season. And I definitely saw uh, more consistency in my performances during the indoor season. And there are other factors that go into that, but
Hmm.
one of them, uh, I believe, and will experiment with next season is not overworking myself once the spring season gets here, just because I have access now to
Yeah.
more opportunity.
Just because you can, it doesn't mean you should.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.